Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 12, I believe this is, of the Hammer and Nails show. I'm Jack Hammer, and right below me here is Jesse Naylor, my co-host. And then tonight we've got a special guest, Rob Schuh, joining us. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing fantastic. Just got back from Hawaii, feeling a little bit more tan than usual, which is saying something for my Irish skin. But yeah, feeling good, man. Feeling good.
Good. How you doing tonight, Jesse?
Hey, man, I'm ready to roll. I'm doing fantastic. How you doing, Jack?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to talking about this. I know this was some of these topics we were thinking of doing last week. So we got into quite a discussion on Kyle Shanahan last week that took us the whole hour, which was fantastic. And so I think tonight we have a show that's going to be able to get us through pretty much an hour as well. So
for sure.
I know we wanted to spend a little bit of time tonight, really most of the time, talking about the quarterback situation in San Francisco and Jimmy Garoppolo in particular, and kind of what our thoughts are around that. The 49ers went out and made the big trade and went ahead and then moved and to get up to number 3, and then they brought in Trey Lance. And so, kind of the first question of the night, the first topic was, do you guys think that Jimmy's play is more to blame for the 49ers deciding to go out and get Trey Lance than the injuries that he's been suffering?
Yeah, let's kick it to Rob. You're the guest, my man. Why don't you go ahead and let us know what your thoughts are on this?
I appreciate that, and you have to forgive me. I took the red eye last night. I've gotten my sleep since then, but if I'm at all foggy, that's why. I always fool myself into thinking, oh, I can sleep on a plane, especially if I can get that flat seat. But no, that's not the case. I'm too old for that. Maybe when I was younger. So I think that when you're talking about whether it was Jimmy's play or the injuries that resulted in Trey being drafted, to me, it's mainly the injuries, but it's certainly impacted by both, because my opinion is that the injuries really impacted Jimmy's play and prevented him from taking that next step. So I think that what I saw in 2019, and I believe what the team and Kyle would have seen in 2019, gave them hope for what Jimmy could become. I don't think that 2019 was what they want from their quarterback in total. I think that it was a step in the right direction. And therefore, 2020 really needed to be Jimmy taking that next step and really showing that he could be the franchise quarterback that he's being paid to be at this point in time. And I think that the offensive line, specifically interior play, was so bad, caused the injury, and just never let Jimmy take that next step. So it was a mixture, but certainly I think that the causation for me comes from the injury. I'm not certain Jimmy can take the next step, but we never got a chance to find out.
That's totally fair. I mean, I'm on the other side of this. I think that they've tried to sell a bill of goods and saying that, well, he just can't stay healthy. But when you look at the way that Shanahan talks about Jimmy G, up until now when they're trying to build that trade value, he doesn't give him glowing reviews. That's one. And the second thing is this, I just don't think he's been that good. I think a lot of things have been overstated. People want to look at the 69% completion percentage, but really he was the second worst quarterback in 2019 as far as intended air yards per attempt. So it's a lot of the same reasons I wasn't in on Mac Jones is the same reasons I'm not in on Jimmy G. And not only that, at least like Mac Jones in college took care of the ball, Jimmy G was also the 4th worst quarterback in the NFL when it came to interception percentage as far as passes and what should have happened with them. So if you're the second worst as far as intended air yards, you better be making good decisions and taking care of the ball. But he wasn't doing that. And then you add in the fact that he also took 36 sacks despite having 2.4 seconds to play with on average in the pocket. That tells me that he's a slow processor. And when he is making decisions, he's not making the right ones. And I think he frustrates the hell out of Kyle Shanahan personally. So for me, I think it's more the play than the injuries. Now, to your point, Rob, they definitely go hand in hand. But I just don't think Jimmy's a very good player. That's me personally.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I kind of fall in the middle of both of you. I kind of agree with what Rob's saying in terms of, 2019 wasn't quite good enough, and so it really had to come out in 2020 was kind of his last effort, because that was also the last year of his contract being where it was kind of unmanageable to make any moves off of him. So they needed to see him make a progression, and it kind of goes beyond that. I'm not going to use any numbers or anything to kind of back me up, but what I'm going to say is if you go back to the start of 2019, remember in the preseason before the start of that season, there was the report from Mike Silver where he basically came out and said that if Jimmy Garoppolo struggles, the 49ers wouldn't have any problems with going Nick Mullins. And I think where that comes from, and you heard it this year on a Monday night broadcast where they said that Nick Mullins is the smartest quarterback in the quarterback room. I think that there was a lot of frustration from Shanahan with Garoppolo and his understanding of the offense, being able to really take full advantage of everything that was in front of him. And this goes back to just a few games of 2018, right? Because he had missed almost that whole season. So there were some frustrations already there. But then he goes out and they win the first couple of games, and then they just kind of get on a roll. So you're not going to change things when you're 8-0 or 9-0 or whatever they were before they finally lost. And then it kind of kept rolling through, and we know how the season ended up, right? So I think there was some frustration leading in 2019. He played good enough throughout that season to hold his own. We're going to roll with you into 2020, and then in 2020 even in 2020, if we look at one of my things with Garoppolo, I'm just going to take one step back, is that Garoppolo is who we know who Garoppolo is. If you look at his numbers from this time in New England to San Francisco to here, he's kind of been the same guy throughout his career. If you look at his week one numbers in his starts in 2018 and 19 with the 49ers and his start with New England, they're almost all exactly the same. Even this year in week one, his numbers are all very similar. And when we went into week one of this year, folks got really upset with that loss, and rightfully so. He had that bad incompletion late that really cost him the game, but at the same point, that was actually Garoppolo's best performance of his career in a season opener, believe it or not. And then week two, he was doing what he usually does in week two, which is play well, and then he gets hurt, and he played really well throughout that Jet game that first half. I know it's the Jets, and so you can kind of slug them off, but the fact that he was doing that on one leg was impressive. At least it was to me. But
you're saying that game versus the Cardinals was his best first game of a season that he's had?
Yes, it was. Yep. If you look at it, if you go back and you look at his numbers from all of his starts, it is, if he hits the throw to the Bourne that's wide open, it becomes even a bigger, it really
that's
is a blowout.
So bad. Wow.
Yeah, that season opener against Minnesota was unpleasant. My wife and I flew out there to see some of her family there, go to that game, check that off the stadium list. And until the third or fourth quarter, when he really started to pick it up and you saw a few of those completions and the Dante Pettis touchdowns, I mean, that was a rough game for sure. Yeah, he has started some seasons slowly.
Yeah, even if you go back to the 2019 season against Tampa Bay, he was not very good in that game.
Right.
If it wasn't for Richard Sherman and Ahkello Witherspoon returning interceptions for touchdowns, that's a 17-17 ball game.
Yeah.
That's really the only reason that they won that. And he had a really ugly interception at one point. If I don't remember, I think they were going in to score and he threw a bad interception. I think that was the situation there. But he just has not played well early on, and the fact that he was playing the way that he did, I think, and then after he came back, he struggled again. And I think Shanahan and Lynch just looked at it and said, look, he's not the guy we need. Plus, he's injured a lot. He's a good player, yes, but we can do better, especially since we're sitting here right now and we have 5 quarterbacks that people think can go in the top of the first round. Let's go get one, because now we're at a point where we can move on from this guy on his contract. So let's go do it. And I think they both play together a little bit, and I think that's why they decided to go out with Lance, because of all those things that I just mentioned. That was kind of a long explanation from me.
I'll do you one better real quick. So I actually because the Cardinals were the worst pass defense in the league in 2019, okay? And he had the luxury of playing them twice, and in those games he played incredible. The Cardinals that year gave up 4,510 yards passing, 38 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions, and a 71% completion percentage. If the Cardinals themselves were a quarterback, they would have been the MVP of the league. So now if you take those games out for Jimmy G, and I get it, everybody has gimme games, whatever, but if you take just those games out, the other 14 games, he averaged 231 yards passing per game, 20 total touchdowns, and 18 total turnovers.
Yeah.
That's so bad. That is so bad.
Yeah, that's not great. I think that for me, if Jimmy had come back and played lights out last year, I don't think that we take Trey. I think that he could have saved his career last year, but he was super inconsistent even when he did play last year, to the point of the first game. I get after that you're really looking at a shell of himself because he was attempting to play through an injury he probably shouldn't have. But that in and of itself is concerning, that a high ankle sprain can literally derail an entire season. I understand how nasty those can be, and I've had one in my life, and I don't know if it was severe or not, but it debilitated me. That's all I can say. But I think that one of the things that you have to acknowledge with Jimmy is we have had shoddy interior line play, in particular last year when we were down to Grossu to start the season, right? When you're on your third string center, that is not a good scenario for any football team. But in particular, when you have a player like Jimmy G, right? What is obvious to me is with Jimmy, you need to have strong interior line play, because he is incapable of, when the pocket breaks down in front of him, of rolling out and escaping. And maybe that's because he's never properly recovered from the ACL injury. But I think you have to really invest in the interior line, which is what gives me optimism for this year. Bringing in Alex Mack, bringing in the rookie Aaron Banks to really solidify the right side of that line. Hopefully those two causing McGlinchey to up his play, because it's obviously all one unit that plays together. So to me, I think that I still have hope for him this year, given what we've invested. But I think that it's fair to say, had he stayed healthy last year but continued to play that he was at the beginning of the year, I think we still take Trey, because I think you would still acknowledge maybe we can win with him. Maybe he's a top 15 quarterback, but he's not elite. He's not one of the top 5 in the league, and that much is obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Jimmy and basically what I heard you say is everything has to be perfect in order for us to win with him. And that's the way it was in 2019. For the most part, it was perfection across the team. Even if you look at his turnovers, a majority of them actually were inside their own 50, which means he was putting the defense in repeated bad situations, and they came through for him, right? So as long as the team is strong around him, they can win. And that's, by the way, that's most quarterbacks in the league, right? The hope is that Trey Lance is not that guy, and that he can be something special, and he can actually be the difference maker and why they win games. That's the goal. That's why you spend 3 first-round picks to get a guy like that. And we'll see if it comes to fruition. I feel very strongly that it will, but only time will tell us that.
Yeah, there were only 2 games in 2019 where I feel like Jimmy won the game, and that was the Rams, where he completed the 2 3rd and 16s, right? And then the Saints. I may be biased because I was at both of those games, and so like the emotion of being at that game makes me root for the fact that Jimmy was able to come through in those scenarios. But to your point, I don't believe everything has to be perfect for Jimmy, but I agree everything has to be good. Defense has to be elite. Offensive line play has to be real solid. I don't count on Jimmy to consistently raise the team and put it on his back. But if you can be in that 12 to 15 range of where you're paid, then that's okay. The problem that we have is currently against the cap, he's one of the top QBs, right? He may be the 12th highest paid quarterback in the league, but because we're not committed to him, that entire amount is hitting our cap this year, and he's not that good of a quarterback.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about the turnover thing, Jesse, and that's right. That was so obvious, especially early in the season, the Pittsburgh game jumps right out at you, right? Because that's a game where they turn the ball over a couple times deep in their own territory, and Pittsburgh only walks away with 6 points. And that really ends up being why they're able to come back and win that game at the end, even though they turned the ball over 5 times. And you're right. I like the fact too that when you're talking about the turnovers, you added in the fumbles, because I think that's left out quite a bit when you look at his overall plays, the amount of times he drops the ball with fumbles. So
I gave him credit for his 1 rushing touchdown as well. Make sure I was fair both ways.
Yeah, and it's just, I think we know who he is, and that's the interesting part of the whole thing. We know who he is. And he just has. We saw that question yesterday. What has he done to get better? We just haven't seen it. So, kind of taking that and moving a step further, what do you guys think the 49ers should do with Garoppolo? Do you think that the 49ers should cut him, trade him? And if you do think that they should, when do you think that should happen?
I mean, I would say personally for me, what I would like to see happen is I want to see him gone before the season starts so that they can have that money available to them, whether they want to use that and save it for next year to gain more of a cap. I saw you, East Bay. To gain more of a cap, or they want to go out and truly go after a win now scenario and pick up some veterans that can really add depth to this team so that they can have a team closer to that 2019 roster where if the injuries do happen and when they happen, because it is a war of attrition in a 17-game season and an early bye week, that they're going to need some of those backup players that can step up and really make a difference. And so for me, I would like to see it happen before the season starts, but I also want it to be very clear to not only Shanahan and McDaniels and everybody watching close to the team, but everybody that's a fan can clearly see during the preseason, training camp, what have you, that Trey is the better option. I want that to be clear to everybody so there's no questions moving forward.
Yeah, I'd preface this with 2 things. Number one, I am absolutely rooting for Trey Lance. I believe him to be the future of the franchise. I think that sooner rather than later, he will be the starting quarterback of the 49ers, and I'm very excited about that. When I looked at the tape of all the players that we could have taken at 3, Trey jumped off the page at me. Jesse, I know that's the case for you as well. But I also want to preface it by saying I do believe that Jimmy is one of the top 15 quarterbacks in the NFL. So when it comes to cutting a top 15 quarterback, that would be insane in my book, right? So we have to get something back for him. And I could see your point there, Jesse, about wanting to move on from him before the season. To me, it's almost as if that ship sailed when we didn't ship him out at the draft, because I feel like that was the only chance we had to get fair compensation for him. And at that point, I don't even know what fair compensation would have looked like. Maybe a 2, probably a 3 or later. But at this point in time, if it's clear to all the fans and everyone that Trey is the guy, I just don't know what that compensation looks like at this point. I think it drops to a 5th or a 6th, and it becomes contingent on Jimmy working with that new team to renegotiate his contract such that it's not a $25 and then $27 million cap hit, right? So I think that if we get nothing back for him, if we had to cut him just to save the money, that's a blemish on John Lynch's record, a big one. Because why didn't you ship him out during the draft? Why didn't you get something for him? Because I have to imagine with all the quarterback needy teams, someone would have given up a reasonable pick. And when I look at the rosters that are out there now, I just do not see teams that he's a real fit for. I think that there are 3, maybe 4 teams out there right now that might want him, but are pretty set in their quarterback room. I think it requires an injury in preseason to a contending team for us to get any value back for Jimmy. I love the idea of starting Trey. However, I haven't seen him on the football field yet, so I am reticent to say he could lead us to the Super Bowl. Jimmy has been a part of a team that has gone to the Super Bowl. Whether or not he carried the team there, I would say he didn't, but he was on the team, and therefore I have some faith. So my thought is go through the year, Jimmy starts, you pray that he stays healthy. If he does and you make the playoffs, now you can talk about getting serious draft capital back in the offseason. So I see shipping him out 2022.
Muted, Jack.
It's better if I unmute myself before I start talking.
No.
I wasn't saying anything.
Listen,
I
you
wasn't saying
move your
anything
lips and
interesting
I'll
to give
talk for
anyway.
you. It'll be really fun.
No, but what I was saying was, I said, I think if this all comes down to the 49ers not being able to bring in a quarterback before the draft. I think that's the reason why they kept him. They went after, they went after Andy Dalton. That didn't work out. They had talks to trade for Teddy
Sam
Bridgewater.
Darnold.
Yeah, Teddy Bridgewater and Sam Darnold. Those names came up. They weren't able to make the deal there. And then, and then they just weren't able to trade Garoppolo. I just don't think that the value for him was what they thought were expecting, and so they weren't able to. They didn't swing a deal, and I think they're kind of left holding on to him right now. And it's their best case scenario is that he shows really well throughout training camp, plays really well in the preseason, shows that he's healthy, and then maybe they can move him at the end of the preseason. I mean, best case scenario is you don't ever want a player to get hurt, right? But the best case scenario for the 49ers is that somebody across the league goes down and they're looking for a starting quarterback, and then that similar to what happened with the Eagles and the Vikings, with a few years ago there when Bridgewater went down up in Minnesota. That's kind of their best case scenario, I think. Otherwise, I think they're going to be stuck with them. I don't see them just outright cutting them, no matter how much sense it makes from a financial standpoint and from even a football standpoint in some ways. And that's kind of our next topic is what they could do if they did move on from him. I just don't see them just saying, okay, we're going to just go ahead and we're going to bite the bullet. We're going to release this guy and we're going to walk away from it. I just don't see that being a case or something that they're willing to do, given their history at the quarterback position and based on what they gave up to get him.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think it's reasonable to keep him at what he's being paid now. I think we get tricked into the cap number of how much Jimmy is counting against the cap this year versus what other quarterbacks are counting against the cap. And to me, I go back to what is he actually being paid for the year? He's being paid as the 12th highest quarterback in the NFL. And the only reason his cap number is so high is because we're afraid to commit to him. If we wanted to kick the can down the road as everyone else with a top 11 salary for QB almost has done, then we could push salary down the road. We could gain some of that back. We could restructure. However, I don't want the 49ers to do that, and the 49ers clearly don't want to do that because, for obvious reasons, it's hard to commit to a guy who can't stay on the field. But I do believe he is in that 12 to 15 range as far as talent, so I think he's being paid at the appropriate level, and I'm confident that with that improved play, he can take us to the promised land. Again, I've just got to see that from Trey before I'm willing to talk about shipping Jimmy out.
Yeah, and we'll talk. I know that we're going to talk about exactly what you could do with the money, so I don't want to, blend it too much. But I have to say, when I think of the things that you could do with that money and add that to Trey and say, okay, do I think the team is in a better position to win with Trey as the starter, Rosen as the backup, and these 2 or 3 players being added to the roster, whoever they are? Or do I think the team is more ready to win with just Jimmy as the starter, Trey as the backup, and adding none of those pieces? And I think that adding those pieces and running with Trey and Rosen is definitely a better chance at actually winning it. And I know that you mentioned it with the salary cap thing, but there's 2 things that are at play here, Rob. There's the salary cap, which we know Grant brings it up all the time, 13.1%. That's the number. Really, that number should be less because that 13.1% by Steve Young was in year 1 of the salary cap era, and teams really didn't have time to adjust. So to me, that number is really 12.5%, which Tom Brady is the one that set that precedent. And then you have to not only overcome that, but if Trey Lance is the starter and Jimmy's the backup at some point during the season, now you've also got to overcome a rookie quarterback winning the Super Bowl. And I think one of them can be overcame. I don't think both of them by the same team in the same season can be overcame. And so that's kind of where my thought is, as to why that Jimmy should go. And the last thing that I'll say is I know that they would love to get something for Jimmy. I understand that. I would too. But I also think if we're just really looking at this fairly, They traded a second-round pick for Jimmy, and I think he's earned that second-round pick, meaning if they got nothing for him, making it to a Super Bowl, even if it was only 1 year that he played, whatever, I think that they got their value out of it. And you can't get caught up in, oh, we need to get one little thing out of it to make it worth our while so we don't have egg on our face. That's an ego-driven move. And the way that I see it is you just have to move on because the future of your team depends on it possibly. And keeping him means hindering next year, which really to me next year, that's the year that they're primed to actually win a Super Bowl, not necessarily this year. So that's where my worry is at with the whole thing.
Yeah, that's
Before we
fair.
move on to the,
Well, I was just going to respond and saying that I agree with the logic that you could be penny wise and dollar foolish in that extent. To your point, Jesse, that the pursuit of getting something for Jimmy should not trump what is right for the organization. If you feel that adding those other pieces is really going to take you over the top, then worrying about the third or fourth rounder that you may or may not get back for Jimmy could in fact be the foolish move. And unfortunately, we've seen the 49ers do that, hold on to players that as fans, we've all said, hey, it's time to move on from. And they're like, well, we invested a second round pick into this guy, so we're going to wait it out and see. So I think that's solid logic there.
Yeah. And I want to respond real quick to Tony's comment. He says the cap is going up dramatically next year. Honestly, I think the Niners cards long-term are pretty good here. I agree with that. But nobody can scoff at an extra $24 million playing towards the cap next year that you don't have currently. Whether you want to offset contracts or however you want to play that, that's a lot of money. And especially when you're already in California where taxes are so high, you have to A, be a winning product to draw players in, and B, you have to be able to compete with those taxes, which means you might have to overpay for a free agent or two, and you really can't do that unless you have extra money at play here. So,
and we have a lot of one-year contracts expiring. We have a lot of free agents next year. That is for certain.
Yeah. And Tony's comment kind of leads in, and Jesse mentioned this already, kind of leads into the kind of the next piece of this. If the 49ers were to go ahead and move on from Jimmy Garoppolo, it's not like I think they would just move on from him and take that $24 million roughly and just sit on it for the rest of this year. I think they would reinvest it in some different ways, because there are some veterans that are still out on the market they could probably go after. So, I guess Rob or Jesse, either one of you, who are some guys you think you'd like to see them go after if they were to move on and free up that money?
Yeah, so I would say that there is valuable money to be spent this year on other pieces. And I think Jesse brings up a fair point that, well, what's going to be the better recipe for success? Is it Jimmy and not being able to afford any of these pieces? Or is it let Jimmy go, start Trey, add these pieces, and now you've created a better organization, a better team around Trey? For me, with what's available right now at this moment, not in a trade scenario where it's sort of an unknown, I'm not super excited about what's out there. There are a lot of value pieces that we could add. I think that we could use another edge depth piece. I would love to see bringing in a sack specialist like Justin Houston, or a bit more of a complete player coming off of injury like Melvin Ingram. I think either one of those guys would be a fantastic addition. I think it's foolish to think that D Ford is going to give us anything this year. We can't count on that. If he does, great. I think that corner depth or a more proven starter across from Jason Verrett would be fantastic. That goes into the hypothetical I talked about with proven starter, because I don't think there are any proven starters available. Some maybe by trade. I like E-Man, but I'm worried about him starting all year opposite Verrett, and certainly Jason Verrett has his own injury issues. I don't want to see two rookies out on the edge or Dante Johnson at some point again this season. So yes, I'd love to have some depth there. We could finally get that coveted second tight end piece that Kyle's been searching for with the Jordan Reed acquisition and all of the names that got bandied about as potential guys we could bring in. Certainly you could look at a Zach Ertz trade if you had some money to pay him, and add a quality third wide receiver. But again, who's really left? For me, this changes significantly when you get toward midseason trade deadline time, because there are going to be some players potentially that are available an Allen Robinson, if you could trade for that type of a wide receiver, now you're changing my opinion. Now I see that, or a Stephon Gilmore, or a piece that adds real value. When it comes to the free agents that are out there right now, I say no, I'd rather have Jimmy than that. When it comes to some of the bigger names that could come available, I'd be hard-pressed to pass that up.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned a couple of them. Everson Griffin's another name that comes in mind. I mean, these are guys that if they're just brought in to be pure pass rushers, they can wreak havoc. And I look at the 2019 team, okay? And that team had a clear identity. That identity was that defensive line. They ran 8 deep. They've lost Buckner, which we know. They've lost D Ford, which you're right. I don't really expect much, if anything, from him. They've now had a depth piece get suspended due to PED violations. I feel like they do need to add another piece there, and one of those names would be fantastic. I also think there are a couple corners that would be helpful to the team. Maybe it's I don't know who's available. I don't know if Drake Kirkpatrick's still out there. I don't know if Prince Amukamara is still out there. But those are names that at least give you good depth. And if you add in, let's say, an Ertz or something like that, that would be very, very cheap to get as far as trade value, then now you're talking. And that's the biggest thing for me to this team. Like when I look at the starting lineup, it's pretty stacked. And it can win with that. But it's going to come down to that depth. Eventually, you're going to need these backups to produce. And when I just look up and down that bench, I don't see it. I mean, I see it at a couple positions. Obviously, quarterback, we're extremely deep. If our third wide receiver goes down, we're good there. But corner, defensive line, even offensive line, there's some concerns there for me. Tight end, the first or second receiver. So I don't know. I either that, or I would prefer to take that money and either take an Armstead contract or a Kittle contract and front load it so that we can save money later, or just leave it wide open and have that extra $25 million next year, which is in a tricky way kind of like $50 million, based off how the salary cap works. So I don't know. I just think there's so many things that can be done with that money. And, Jimmy being on the roster, I don't think the team wins a Super Bowl. So go. That's where I'm at with it.
Well, one name that I'm going to throw out there, and I think this name's, it's not a name that we haven't already heard. Melvin Ingram, bring in Melvin Ingram, as a defensive end pass rusher. When you look at what the 49ers have done, they've really built up the interior of their defensive line. They have a ton of guys. When you look at the guys on the defensive line, it's pretty much all interior guys. You have, DJ Jones, Kevin Givens, Zach Kerr. You start going through the list, and there's about 8 guys that are named guys that are pretty darn good that are going to be playing on the inside. But then you can look at the outside and on the edges, they pretty much have Nick Bosa, Arden Key, Samson Ebukam, and that's about it. They really don't have another one. I know they use Armstead as an end in their base package, but they really don't have another pass rusher that's on the roster that really does anything for you. And even Ebukam, it's going to be interesting to see who he is, because based on what we've seen of him in Los Angeles, he's not an explosive guy around the edge like D Ford was. D Ford used to be able to just run around the edge and beat that tackle around the corner, and that's not what Ebukam shows, at least yet. He's pretty much going to get into that tackle, drive him back, hold him, and then shed once the quarterback has to move. So if they can bring a guy like Ingram in who's has history with playing with a Bosa, understands kind of that whole scenario, and I know he didn't have a much last year, but still he's another guy can really get after it. I think that would be a nice way to spend some of that money. You mentioned some free agents, and I think Jesse, did you mention Brian Poole as one of the options?
Oh, Brian. Yeah, Brian Poole I've been on big time, and I would love to bring him in. The problem is he's not going to play outside, and so even if you bring him in, you still have to bring in another outside corner. But no, I did not mention him. But yes, I agree. If you could bring in a Poole, I'm all for that.
Yeah,
and I was going to say there's Steven Nelson also from the Steelers. So there's some guys that are out there still available in free agency. Or I know you mentioned trade earlier. Go out there and make the big trade for Stephon Gilmore. and maybe spend some draft capital for next year to help make it done. Or who knows? Maybe the Patriots, if you throw in a draft pick or something like that, maybe they'll take Garoppolo off your hands. Who knows? I mean, who really knows how in love they are with Cam Newton? So.
Yeah, and I could get behind that 100% because that would feel like you're getting something back for Jimmy. And while I still disagree with Jesse on who should start this year because of the experience factor and the known quantity, even though we know him to be a sort of middle of the pack quarterback, the great point that you just brought up there is that $25 million, even if not spent, the remainder of which goes forward to next year. Because I'd like to point out that the huge jump in the salary cap comes in 2023. And I relate this to what happened in the NBA. I don't know if you guys follow it, but in 2016, a boatload of bad contracts went out. 4-year, $100 million contracts to guys that were riding the bench. I mean, the cap exploded, and therefore the free agents who happened to luck out and be free agents that year got paid. So that's what's going to happen in 2023. The 49ers are in a sort of by luck and chance great scenario to sign a bunch of guys next offseason, lock them up for multiple year deals, and avoid filling a bunch of gaps in 2023. They can only do that if they have the money available. And really the only way they get that money is by taking Jimmy's salary off the books. And certainly getting this year's salary off the books helps that. So every player they can lock into a multiple year deal next offseason saves them from overpaying in 2023.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to address Sean Johnson's question. He says, what about losing the locker room? And I think that was a fair point. At this point, I'm going to answer it by saying this. Trey Lance has worked with Brandon Ayuk in the offseason where they trained together. They did conditioning together and speed drills together and all of that. Then he went on vacation with George Kittle, and he's been seen recently working out with Mohamed Sanu. I think that whole losing the locker room situation is a bit overblown at this point. I think it was a legitimate concern a month and a half ago, but now that we've seen those individual workouts with those players on that team, and we already know that Fred Warner is going to be a leader and he's going to hold things down regardless of what's going on. I mean, this is a guy that deserves to be paid yesterday and showed up to training camp and played basically as much, or mini camp, and played as much as he could because he doesn't care about that. He's just strictly the leader of this team. So I'm not worried about the locker room, quote unquote, being lost if Lance takes over that job anymore.
If he did come in and start from the outset, any concern as to what a bad year from Lance year one might have on his career trajectory? Because to me, that remains the biggest one. I think you're right about the locker room. That was a concern for me. But as we see more and more, as the players warm up to him, and I think that in preseason games, we'll get a better sense for that as well. If we see equal play from both, then I think the chatter will get louder and rightfully so. But if Trey came in and bombed, that could be detrimental to the career growth. Any worries about that on your end?
Personally, no, because I'm actually more worried about. So this is a kid that just sat out a whole year. I'm more worried that if he sits out another year, that's going to be more detrimental than letting him come in, make mistakes, and be coached up. And I really feel like, I mean, we already know what Shanahan brings to the table as a play caller. He's going to protect him as much as he possibly can. And Trey's a good decision maker. Mm-hmm. If anything, he may hold the ball too long and take some sacks, but he's not going to just throw the ball up for grabs. Like that's never been in his makeup. And so, no, I don't. And also just looking at him mentally and the way that he approaches the game and how hard he works and how humble he is, I think he's the type of guy that would take a bad game or a bad stretch and turn that around very, very quickly. So no, I'm personally not concerned about that. I am very concerned about him sitting a whole nother year and then telling him to go play in the NFL when he hasn't played in 2 full years. That does concern me.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. I think if you look at it, I think there's even if he's not 100% ready, like we to come out like at all pro level kind of thing, right? I think they could go out and he can have what they would consider a successful year. Because if you go back and you watch early 2012 Washington with RG3 as a rookie and the way that they managed him, there's nothing on that film that Trey Lance isn't capable of doing himself. And I think that's part of what drew Shanahan to him, was he saw that and he's like, look, I could win with this guy. I think this guy's even better. And, let's build around him. I think because when you watch, it's tons of screens. It's all that stuff that we kind of ripped Mac Jones for, right? All the little screens, all that kind of stuff. But then you throw in the athletic piece of what he can bring to the table on top of that. And you look at what they've done, and they've built up the running game around him with big running backs to get some bulk so they can maybe carry more of the load. I don't have a problem at all with them starting him week one. The losing the locker room piece, I don't think they'll lose the locker room. A couple of weeks ago, a month ago, that case could have been made, but you're hearing these guys talk about him in glowing terms now, to where him starting doesn't seem like it'd be would even faze them at all. My concern would be more of Garoppolo going out and playing well and them not wanting to see him go. But at this point, I don't even think that's really the case. I think they're seeing what Trey Lance is bringing to the table and what he can do for them. And it becomes everybody's really selfish when you get into it, right? What can you do for me? Even though they're teammates, they want it. This is their livelihood. This is how they're going to put food on the table at the end of the day. And they want the best quarterback out there possible to help them get the numbers to do it.
Yeah, that's fair as well. Yeah, the only counter I have for sitting on the bench and then coming in lights out would be Aaron Rodgers, for sure. You watch him sit 3 or 4 years before he finally comes in and just lights it up. So I would imagine with a guy like Trey, who is a book rat and a gym rat, and someone who seems to motivate himself. I read that story about how he woke up his father every morning, and like just who he is as a person and the family he comes from. I have no doubt about his ability to push himself. And so I think that I'd be okay with the time away. I think that he's the type of player that would benefit from it, that the speed of the NFL would catch up to him. He would really engross himself in the playbook. So I would be okay with waiting that year and then putting him in. I don't think it would negatively impact him.
For sure.
Yeah, and just this is the other point that Sean makes, and it's a good one too, and it's one that I saw. I guess Jesse might have mentioned it last night. I'd seen this a couple of days ago from one of the salary cap guys that had been asking the question, and this is the other part of it, that if they do go with Garoppolo and he gets hurt, now they're stuck with it, and I think that when you look back at last year and you wonder, well, why did Garoppolo not come back because of that injury? Was it him? Was it the team? I really think that the team was holding him back because they didn't want, for this very reason right here, they didn't want him to go out and get hurt, get on the hook for that, because they want to move on from him. And all the stuff that we've seen all plays into it. So
this is the biggest piece for me, and the most fearful, and the one that could be used to persuade me to move on from Jimmy now. That's the worst case scenario. It's week 4. Jimmy's out for the year. It turns out Trey really wasn't ready, but now he's in by sheer force. And now you have dead salary that you can't recoup. You've lost the $25 million. You didn't get the play from him. That to me is the scenario you could use to sell me on. It's time. Move on from Jimmy. Go to Trey. But if we're talking about fear of injury, I've got that across the board with the 49ers. So I'm choosing to ignore it willfully.
Yeah, but even worse, I think, would be, what if he got injured week 4 and Trey came in and absolutely killed it, lights out, and you're going, this guy should have started from week 1, and now we've just lost the $25 million. I think that would be even worse, because then it's like, well, there it was the whole time. Why didn't Shanahan see this, right? So,
yeah, yep, and the other piece too, that's kind of keeping on that theme that we were talking about a second ago, as far as the locker room. Aruna, he goes back in time to Steve Young. He didn't have the locker room and the fans when he took over from Montana. His performance over time got together. But I think the thing, I'm not sure about Rob, but I know for myself, when Young first came in, they weren't very good in 1991. His first season, he was only 5-6 that year. but they started off 5-6. Excuse me. I think that they weren't very good. That was the one season between 1983 and sometime in the late 90s or early 2000s where they didn't make the playoffs, even though they finished off 10-6. So we don't want a duplication of the Steve Young thing either, because I don't think that's positive for the 49ers.
No, I will admit an embarrassing fact that at that time, if you remember, Steve Bono came in for a bit. He actually went 5-1 in his 6 starts, and I think that was 90 or 91, right? So I was 12.
91.
I was an impressionable 12-year-old, and I'm not going to lie, I was in the Steve Bono camp. I don't know why. I don't know what it was, but I was in the Steve Bono camp. So, yes, I think that it's hard to tell early on where people's alliances are, nor should it matter. The front office and the head coach need to have a clear idea, much like they did in 1990, moving on to Steve Young. They knew what they wanted. They knew what they saw. So I do have faith that if they see that in Trey, that I'm willing to ride that bandwagon. Because as I said, I know he's the future.
Yeah,
for sure.
Steve Bono was good. He went on to play for the Chiefs and did really well with them too.
He did, and he's a super nice guy. I got a chance I rode in a bus with him at a Hall of Fame induction ceremony. He's funny as hell too. Like,
is he?
Just a nice guy. Just a nice dude.
Yeah, he played for the Chiefs like every other ex-49er quarterback.
Yeah, there definitely was a pattern, right? You had Montana, you had Bono, you had
Gerbach, Alex Smith.
It was Alex Smith too. Yeah, 4 of them. Wow, that's kind of the pipeline there. Really quick, one question. This was brought up a little bit a while ago by Tony, but I think this is a good question to kind of address here towards the end of the show. Is this the best O-line Jimmy has played with behind in San Francisco? This O-line that they put together for 2021, would that be their best O-line that he's had in front of him? What do you guys think?
That's tough. I think that if you look at what the O-line should have been in 2019, that it's pretty close, if not give the edge to the 2019 line. But injuries ruined us, right? As they have seemingly every year. But I do have faith in the moves that were made this offseason. Only time will tell, but I think that Alex Mack, regardless of any drop-off in play, brings what you need from the center position, which is confidence, understanding of the playbook, and the ability to scheme the protections for the remainder of the line. And I think that Alex Mack is absolutely going to be able to do that. And I don't think that the importance of that can be overstated. And I like the trend towards the bigger guy to his right in Aaron Banks. I think that good for the 49ers for finally acknowledging the injury thing and drafting accordingly. So while we haven't seen them play, I'm optimistic that the power run game will take a next step here, that we still have the quickness out in space to execute the zone blocking that we've been so good at. So I anticipate that this offensive line will edge out 2019. Our run game will be lights out. I think we're going to have the best run game in the NFL this season, and I think it's going to lead to that success in the play action. I'm very optimistic about the offense this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the whole Mac thing, because I think a lot of people look at Richburg and they said, well, he was a total bust for us. Look at his PFF numbers. But really, he got everybody in place to play better around him. That's what this team was missing last year, was a competent center, not just by pass blocking and run blocking on his individual basis, but being able to call out those protections and get everybody across the board aligned and ready to roll. It's so important, and it's the biggest reason why I was so big on the 49ers going after Lindsley and, say, a Reef instead of spending all that money on Trent Williams. Now, they went ahead and got Mac, and I'm cool with that. You know, he's a little bit older than what I would expect or hope for. But that being said, he is a veteran. And regardless of what his play is, as long as he's healthy, his individual play is not what we want to look at here. We want to look at how organized the protections across the line are. And I think it's extremely important. I'm with you, Rob. I actually do think on paper that 2019 team offensive line was slightly better. And a big reason for that is Mike McGlinchey. Mike McGlinchey going into 2019 was a heck of a lot higher revered than he is going into 2021. So That right there is the biggest question mark. And let's not forget that I believe it was Person was on this team, and he was ranked very highly the year before across, any metric that you could look at. So we love what we have in Bakes, but we don't know for sure what he's going to be, right? So with that being said, I feel like that 2019 line on paper was the better offensive line.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and it gets even more interesting when you start to look at the numbers. I know, you talked about some of the numbers with Garoppolo earlier. If you go and you look at the numbers from 2016 or 2019 and 2020, the 49ers in 2020 actually gave up fewer sacks per pass attempt than they did in 2019. In 2019, they were around 2.6 or 2.9% of their pass attempts resulted in a sack. Last year it was down to, I think, 2.4. So not a huge change, but there definitely is a trend in a positive direction. And when you watch that team this year, I don't think you ever really felt like there was, right? And probably because they weren't winning and they're having to throw the ball a lot more often. But I think on paper that this offensive line would be the best offensive line of the three. I agree with you guys both 100%. Alex Mack becoming the quarterback up front is huge. That's the biggest missing piece. I don't know if either of you saw the tweet from Brian Baldinger right before we went on, where he detailed a running play for the 49ers against Seattle, where there's just a complete miscommunication on the line of scrimmage, and they let the nose tackle and Bobby Wagner basically run free unblocked on a running play and make the tackle in the backfield. And he's so fired up, he's almost screaming into the computer. And it's and he's just an analyst, right? Not even tied to the team. So that's one thing I wouldn't expect to have happen. I think the other piece is Aaron Banks is going to if Aaron Banks can be the guy for the 49ers that you see on film at Notre Dame, the right side of the offensive line, interior of the offensive line, is going to have a huge leap forward when it comes to pass protection, because he's just a complete wall in pass protection. He's just a stud, moves his feet well, and once guys get into him, they pretty much just shut down. At least that's what it was like in the collegiate level. So it'll be, if he can do that with the 49ers, they definitely have the potential to be the best because of Mack and Banks. McGlinchey, I think, is who he is. He's always going to be a really good run blocker, mediocre pass guy. And then you have Laken Tomlinson, who I think is a little bit overrated in terms of where people think he is compared to what he actually brings to the table. And Trent Williams is Trent Williams. So for me, I'm gonna say yes, that this will end up being the best O-line that they've had during the Shanahan era, at least.
Yeah, the key is, will it be Jimmy playing behind it?
Right. It goes right back to the. Yeah, that's a good point. So. Let's see. Did you guys see any other questions over in the comments?
No, I didn't see anything that caught my eye. I mean, a lot of back and forth with them, but nothing crazy over here.
Yeah. So, yeah. Unless either one of you have anything else, that's pretty much our show for tonight.
Yeah, I would say, Rob, why don't you plug your YouTube channel, man? Give these guys a way to find you.
For sure. So my YouTube channel is just my name, Rob Schuh, Schuh. Pronounced like what you wear on your feet, but spelled a hell of a lot differently. Those Dutch and Germans love to spell with their C's and H's. But yeah, no, I've got my mailbag questions over there is what I've been focused on. Clearly, I'm on with Grant on a regular basis. I'll be on there tomorrow at 11 on his channel, and go to my YouTube channel, subscribe. I've been doing these on location shoots for the mailbags. I recorded 2 while I was in Waikiki Beach that I'm going to throw up there. Hopefully they came out all right. You never know when it's on scene and you're trying to get the light and everything just right. But I did a great one out at Eloa Falls, which was a tribute to my wife. I asked her to marry me out there. And so right before our 10-year anniversary, I recorded the mailbag there. But there's going to be regular content coming up. So please go over there, subscribe, and look for that new content coming out.
Yeah, for sure.
If
you're hilarious,
if you're not
by the way.
Him, yeah.
Yeah, I
I
seem very straight-laced here. Like people, I laugh when I look back at the shows with Grant, and because his comment sections are just going off during the show. And on one of the first ones, people are like, is he a doctor? Is he an attorney? Is he like everyone's like, I'm so serious. But if you go to my channel, you'll see my comedy side. I like to think I'm fairly funny. I certainly don't take myself seriously at all. and it comes through a little bit in some of those bits that I do over there on the channel.
Yeah, you do some really funny stuff.
Your background definitely comes across as someone who is a little more learned than maybe Jesse or myself. But but if you guys aren't following Rob right now on Twitter or on his YouTube, you need to go follow him. He's extremely talented, puts together some just hilarious videos and really creative stuff that I can only dream of doing.
Yeah, look for this Folgers sponsorship that comes into some of the videos. Those are Folgers is sending me multiple cease and desist letters at this point, but my wife is a lawyer, so I just hand those off to her and I don't worry about it.
Oh so man,
so good.
Yeah. So, but beyond that, once again, Jesse has his channel over Last Second Sports. So, if you're, I think he just passed 2,000 subscribers on his channel. So, if you're watching this and you're not already subscribed to his, make sure you do that because they put out great content all throughout the week, as well as the channel you're on here, mine. If you can subscribe and set up your notifications over here, that'd be great. And got some film breakdowns and things that are going to be coming your way again shortly. So just thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Hope you guys all enjoyed the show, and we'll be back at you next Thursday, same time. Have a good night, everybody.
Nice.